Well, greetings out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's epic video, which features a very early Magnatone Melodier Deluxe. Okay, so let's take a real close look at it, check it over inside and out, as is our standard procedure, and see if we can't learn a little something about early Magnatone amps and amplifiers in general. First off, this is, according to silk screening on the chassis, a model M195-5J, and it should have two 6SL7s, two 6V6s, and one 5Y3. And since, as you notice, there's 5 tubes, that's why they call it a 5J. That was the Magnatone method of labeling their amps, which started in 1947 and continued up to around 1952 or 53. So this amp must come from that era. Amps from this era also are known to have a reptile pattern on their covering and a geometric grille, and this one definitely has both. Jack has simply vanished. We've looked everywhere for him and we have no idea where he could be. Every once in a while when I walk on this rug I can hear him meow, but other than that we don't have a clue. Jack? I'll be darned. There he is. What a surprise. I like the shape of it. It's a trapezoid, I would say, on its side, and that tilts it back and projects the music upward. Sort of like some PA cabinets are shaped like this, and that's probably the technology they were drawing on. Has a really nice heavy leather handle, which is not the original. Unfortunately, I don't think they used handles this good back in that day, but this one's been installed correctly. The rivets were left alone, and whoever installed this drilled out that center pin, put in the new handle, and then repinned it. So hats off to the gentleman who did this job. Now, looking at the rear and tilting the cabinet for illumination, we see the 12-inch speaker, and it is a Magnavox, which is not correct for this particular amplifier, but it is a decent vintage speaker. I may have a better one on the shelf, and we may end up installing it. We shift downward. I can see some hand lettering in there on the chassis. So this amp's obviously been worked on. You see it has a 3-prong power cord. Kind of a grungy control panel. I don't think that's going to come off either. It's probably rust. We see Magna Electronics Company, Inglewood, California, an auxiliary AC output receptacle. Of course, fuse and pilot light. And then we have microphone volume, tone with on-off switch, and instrument volume. Okay, I bet you that the impedance is different on the inputs, and they're nicely labeled. And also we have our Melodier and model number and the sweet little musical notes. So let's pull the back door here and take a look at what wonders await us within. Oh, and before we do, let's take a look at the oft neglected bottom surface of the amp. I can tell you a lot about what the amp's been through. In this case, it looks good to me. It's got the riveted hard rubber or plastic feet, all intact, which is a good sign. The original serial number plate. Okay, and I'm going to assume these are the screws that are holding the chassis in place. We'll find that out in just a minute. Okay, so now let's go ahead and continue with the removal of the Mack door and the extraction of the chassis. After the removal of 3 nice original screws, which tells you something about the amp and that it hasn't been messed with by baboons. Okay, the 3 original screws were still in place on the back door, and you can see that it's in great shape. All of the material glued down. And notice this isn't vinyl. This reminds me of that, I don't know, kind of that type of cloth they used to use on tablecloths in Italian restaurants and on luggage, okay, which is probably where the technology came from. Very thin, and really cloth with just a very, very thin layer of this texturing material to make it look like alligator. Now let's take a look inside, and it's just almost disturbingly clean with no rodent droppings. Darn it. Okay, I've really developed a taste for those, and you can see where that replacement speaker's been wired in, and a portion of one of the original wires is still in place. Okay, we'll tend to that. That's kind of down the road for us. For now, let's take a look at the top of the chassis and the hand-labeled sockets. Got the 5Y3 rectifier right where it belongs, next to the power transformer. We've got the output transformer here. So remember how in the early ones they always mounted the output transformer on the speaker, but this one appears to have always been mounted here. So this is not the real early type of version with the electrodynamic speaker or the speaker with the tandem output transformer. But there are two 6V6 sockets, but lo and behold, instead of 6 SL7s, we have 12 AX7s. Now, to some of us, that's a step in the wrong direction because we really like those old octal tubes in the preamp position. But you've got to admit 12 AX7s are real performers, okay? I thought when I first saw this that this must be a later model. But then I did some research and I found out that 12 AX7s were introduced in September of 1947. So even though this amp is supposed to come with the 6 SL7s, these were available at the time and apparently were considered a step up, I guess, in tone and fidelity. We'll see. So now it's time to undo those two centrally located screws and pull the chassis. Some extra tubes came with it, as well as the proper tube set, and also some capacitors. So I'm going to assume these are the ones that have been removed from the circuit, and also the shields for the 12AX7. Step one in any chassis removal is always to unsolder the speaker leads from the speaker and protect your cone from the hot solder falling from the terminal here down on it, burning holes and an otherwise pristine cone. Okay, you really have to be careful to get these wires separated, because sometimes in your frenzy to get the chassis out so you can start working on it, you'll tear, I shouldn't laugh, you'll tear the wiring and terminals loose from the speaker, which isn't good. Well, after removing two monstrous sheet metal screws, Magnatone doesn't mess around when they're putting chassis into cabinets. Okay, the chassis out, and as you can see, the floor is immaculate. And now we can flip this jewel over and see what awaits us under. Well, the discoveries here looking at the circuit are mainly positive. The electrolytics were replaced with good quality F&T electrolytic capacitors. Got a couple bumblebees here. But there's one thing that we can learn from this, I think, and that is when you're wiring these, you have to be sure they're more secure. This one's out here flapping in the breeze, and with some rather harsh handling or transport, it could move around and get into a dead short position, which wouldn't be healthy for the power transformer or the welfare of the amp. So I'm going to remount these, reinstall them in a way where they're not so prone to motion and vibration. Okay, I'm sure they're wired in correctly. It's just a matter of the actual physical way that they were installed in the chassis. So I'm going to set down the camera and get to work on that, and I'll be right back. Well, so far so good. In this area, I've got the electrolytics to lay flat against the chassis surface where they will not move. And if you remember that bypass cap here that was connected by the yellow wire that came around and it was floating here in the air, keep your leads as short as possible. If it goes to this terminal here on the tube, just solder to that terminal and the other end to the closest ground. This thing's not going anywhere, okay? And it just looks so much neater. Now I have to address this rather tangled mess over here. That's just a short circuit on its way to happening. I'm going to have to do a little redesigning, maybe even put in a terminal strip here to make sure these things are immobile and short proof. Alright, I use this little terminal strip here to stabilize these caps and to make sure that none of the wires could ever come in contact with metal. Okay, and the capacitors are laid down flat against the chassis surface. It's still not perfect, but I think it's a whole lot more stable and a whole lot more likely to continue working for a real long time without any pyrotechnics. Well, I tested this with the signal generator inputting the 500 cycle tone and was underwhelmed. The gain was quite low and it tended to distort very early. You know, I have a kind of sentimental affection for bumblebee caps, and these were the coupling caps between the phase inverter and the two output tubes. But in this case, these jewels leak like the Exxon Valdez. Okay, so they're going to go into my very special parts bin, and I've replaced them with some brand new 0.05 microfarad coupling caps. And now miraculously, with the two new coupling caps, that very low gain, early to distort circuit is working like a charm. One other bit of excitement was provided by the very loud popping when this would first be turned on and the power's coming up. It would pop loud enough to startle you several times. And I was thinking, oh, maybe there's a bad solder joint or something like that, maybe a defective capacitor. No, there's a shorted General Motors genuine parts tube, and it was flashing blue. Sometimes if you hear loud pops like that, don't be afraid to look at the tubes themselves to see if there's any internal flashing, okay, because you can beat your brains out on the circuit and have it just be something inside. So this jewel is joining the bumblebees in the secret parts bin. Well, it's a bad day for tubes. Here's another 6V6, a Zenith that draws very little current and refuses to stabilize. It just keeps creeping up, but never even gets close to the current flow that it should have. So, kiss it goodbye. I've replaced it now with another 6V6 under here, and let's hope it behaves better, or you know where it's going to end up. Nope, the streak continues. I believe this is a Ford Motor Company tube. It doesn't draw any current. Okay, it's stone dead. Adios, tube. Well, I'm going to go in the house to my stash and get some decent 6V6s. Well, if there's a lesson to be learned here, don't trust tubes that come with amps. Okay, I just went in the house and got a good probably NOS Sylvania 6V6 and plugged it into this position. Now let's see what happens. Okay, you're not going to believe it, but this tube up here that was working okay just slowly failed. So another Delco or GM tube in the trash. Of course, RCA probably makes them all, but now I finally got a pair of tubes that function as they should, and they came from my own stash. Okay, so like I said, cast a wary eye at tubes that come along with amps. Here we have Casey doing her Sphinx imitation, waiting for breakfast. She's always waiting for some meal. Casey? Good girl. Alright, I took some bias readings and came up with these results. Plate voltage is very moderate, 239.7. This is the resistance of the primary winding of the output transformer for the upper tube. That's for the lower. Voltage drops, plate currents, plate dissipation. And as you can see, they're fairly well matched, and they're comfortably below the maximum, which I think makes good sense for an amp of this age. Okay, so I'm going to stick with this cathode bias resistor, and I think it's time to hook up a guitar to this jewel and see how it sounds. Now before we button this jewel up, let's have Ollie and Jack play a quick tune through it just to see how it sounds with that Magnavox speaker and all of the repairs and modifications that have been made. I got to tell you, I'm completely underwhelmed by the tone with this speaker. I thought it was really tinny, kind of metallic, very unpleasant. And to be honest, you know, I had high hopes. It is a 12-inch Alnico speaker, but it just doesn't have it. And I think this is just a radio speaker. So this looks like something you'd see inside of an old console radio. And as such, it's more mid-range intensive, and you can tell by the kind of flimsy basket it has and all, it's just not made to handle a lot of cone excursion and bass frequencies. This just isn't cut out for guitar use. Now I have another speaker I'd like to try. Okay, this is a Hepner speaker. It's not a brand that I'm particularly familiar with, but I've had this for a while, and it's a very impressive and very nicely built speaker with a big, heavy basket, and you can see how much space there is for cone excursion. It's got a good stout Alnico magnet, heavy-duty cone with a very stout suspension. I think it may have been reconed, or at least the dust cover may have been replaced, because I can't believe that Mylar dust cover is original. But this is sort of, to me, the diametric opposite of that Magnavox speaker. This says guitar to me. So let's install this in the cabinet and compare it to how that Magnavox radio speaker sounded. Okay, here we go with the Hepner speaker. Wow, I'm not sure how it sounded on your end, but I'll tell you here there was a difference in night and day. This Hepner speaker sounds a whole lot warmer and smoother, better bass response, clearer treble, just infinitely better. So I'm going to leave it installed and put the chassis back into the cabinet, and we're going to have Ollie and Jack play a few tunes through it just to make sure it sounds good, and then we're going to consider it done. Okay, I'm putting it all back together. You see the Hepner speaker is very happily nestled in the cabinet with the chassis below. Let's get that back panel on, and then we'll hear a few tunes. Okay, everything's back together with that new speaker, so let's have Ollie and Jack serenade us with a few tunes, and then I'll have a special feature for you at the end of this video. Well, I guess that about does it for this video on the 47 to 52 Magnatone Melodier Deluxe. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to thank all my Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors for your generous contributions to our channel and for keeping us afloat advertising free for another month. For those of you who would like to join them in supporting our channel, I've included links in the video description to enable you to do so. Our second video is going to be a real change of pace. I want you to help me welcome a new addition to our hot rod family. I was able to make a favorable car trade and ended up with an absolutely classic post-war style 32 Ford truck hot rod. This is not a rat rod by any means. It's just a beautifully constructed original hot rod that was built back probably in the late 60s or early 70s and is still in exactly the form that it was then, like a museum display. So without further ado, let's go outside and take a quick look at it and see what you think. Well, the 32 Ford truck was just delivered. I'm going to do a walk around of it exactly as it came here. As you can see, the engine is really the high point. The 6 Stromberg 97s, yellow tinted windows, which is real old-fashioned, as are the wide white walls on chrome steel wheels. 32 grill shell. Shortened bed, cheater slicks on the rear with white walls, something like 53 or 4 Ford tail lights, and let's look inside. It's got the lovely Indian blanket motif, okay, which isn't going to stay, I can tell you. It's got the bomber seats, okay, with God knows what behind. And big old, like an Oldsmobile or Pontiac steering wheel from the 50s. Nice dash. Okay, all in all, really nice. Metal roof. It's kind of a flat, what would you call this? Not burgundy, kind of a maroon color with black highlights. Nice tonneau cover. Okay, so that's about it, and the work can begin pretty soon on this, like maybe in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to turn off the camera and get started. Before I get started, I just wanted to cover a few details for you car buffs. It turns out, after doing some research, these are 1961 Oldsmobile 98 tail lights. The rear end is a rather drastically narrowed Ford 9-inch with positive traction gears. I'm not exactly sure of the ratio. The rear tires are genuine Firestone Dragster cheater slicks with wide white walls, chrome reverse wheels, and chrome dog dish hubcaps. The engine is a mid to late 60s 327 with an Offenhauser intake manifold, Offenhauser breathers, and 6 two-barrel Stromberg 97 carburetors. As is typical of Stromberg 97s, they tend to leak gas. At this time, only the 2 central carburetors are connected and functional. The outer 4 are complete and could be functional, but are a little bit of overkill on a 327 engine. There's a nice fuel distribution block on the firewall and a Ronco magneto. This isn't a fake one of these modern distributors that looks like a magneto. It's the real thing, and it works great. We'll go for a ride in a future video, but for now, just take my word for it. The engine runs real smoothly and is really strong. It pulls hard. Okay, the transmission is a TH350 with a shift kit. Okay, so that ought to do it for the details. It's time to get started on the interior.